never left.
Let's get it.
It's Double Move Sports. Y'all already know what it is. I'm Stef Albiero. I'm here with the fantasy phenom, Alex Lott. Say what's up to the people, bro. How was your football weekend?
Oh, it was fantastic. This is the first time this season I've done a clean sweep in all my leagues, did not lose in a single place. We're recording this on Monday. That is assuming there's no funny business by the Falcons tonight. I need like 9 points from Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, so fingers crossed there. But it was a good one, Steph. The fiance won in her league. That's a plus. And, Steph, you know, me and you put the hurt on some people in some beer pong this weekend. Won a couple tourneys there out with the boys. So all around it was fantastic.
Hitting Death Cup and Grand Finals. Going on a crazy losers run in a double elimination tournament. But there's a lot to talk about here. And one of the things I think we need to talk about, literally breaking news as we just hit record here, Bill O'Brien.
Goodbye.
Just been fired by the Houston Texans. Probably fired himself since he's the GM and the head coach. But how are we feeling about this for Houston? Is it positive all across the board? And, you know, who are they going to bring in?
It's a good thing. I mean, Bill O'Brien, I don't think he's a bad coach. Definitely a bad GM. So I think this is the change that the Houston Texans needed. No, I don't think the 0-4 start is necessarily all his faults. I mean, they had an incredibly tough draw to start out the year with their schedule. If you look at who they played, I don't know who made this, but they played the Chiefs in week 1, the Ravens in week 2, the Steelers in week 3, Vikings last week. You can make an argument they should have won, but the Vikings are still a decent football team. So a really, really tough draw to start out. I think it's a good thing for their organization. I mean, Bill O'Brien shipped off DeAndre Hopkins, has shipped off several of their draft picks. They have an incredibly high payroll. So, I mean, you know, he's kind of screwed over their organization here for the next couple of years. No doubt they'll get back on their feet. But watch Bill O'Brien go sign with the Arizona Cardinals.
What?
And then we'll have some insider trading going on there, shipping off DeAndre Hopkins essentially for free and joining up with them. If that happens, you heard it here first, but I think Twitter would explode if that was the case.
I'm really liking what I'm seeing. Eric Bieniemy, Kansas City Chiefs offensive coordinator, coming over as the head coach for Houston. I think that'd be a fantastic hire for them. Get that offense going. Let Deshaun cook.
I mean, for the rest of this year, though, do we know who the interim head coach is going to be? Is it going to be Romeo Crennel?
No idea. We'll have to follow this one closely.
Got it.
All in all, it's just one that we need to monitor. Hopefully it is a positive. Hopefully we don't see this organization go into tank mode for the rest of the year, but I don't think Deshaun Watson's going to let that happen. But let's talk about some of these topics here from week 4. We're now 25% of the way through the season.
Crazy.
It's moving fast, man. And let's talk about, like we do every single episode, let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. This might be one of the last times we need to talk about them because it's turning into a pretty chalk matchup for them week in, week out. Pretty predictable game scripts. The Dallas Cowboys are now the new Atlanta Falcons. They're going to go down early, and Dak is going to sling it. They're second in pace of play. Dallas defense literally can't stop anybody. The Cleveland Browns had 7.7 yards per rush attempt as a team. That's including Baker. That's including Dontrell Hilliard. And that's with Nick Chubb being out of the lineup. At one point before halftime, they were at like 9.5 yards per attempt as a team. So this Cowboys defense cannot stop anybody. They have no linebacker help. Their best safety or their best defensive back is a rookie. Teams are going to be able to put up points. People are going to blame Dak on this one. I'm already seeing the mainstream, sports talk guys trying to take shots at Dak Prescott. He is not the reason for these issues at all whatsoever. He's the only reason they've been able to stay in games. Right now, he's on pace to throw for over 6,000 passing yards and has so far been able to support a lot of weapons in that offense. In this game, Dak threw the ball 58 times, almost 60 pass attempts.
He's on pace for like 800.
Yeah, he's been throwing a ton. Had 57 attempts in week 3 against Seattle and then had 58 here. So hitting 60 in back-to-back games almost. Had himself a day. Was a fantastic fantasy option as he's been all season, as we predicted in kind of the mock draft era before the season started. But Dak on the day completed 41 of those 57 passes for 502 yards and then had 4 touchdowns. Also had a couple rushing attempts to give you another little baseline there. But Dak is absolutely just airing the ball out because he has to, and this team is running a lot of plays. Zeke is doing Zeke things. Let's talk about some of the wide receivers here. Alex, I'll go ahead and let you take a victory lap on CeeDee Lamb. You were all on him before the season. It's got to feel good going off in this game with 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, man. I mean, first of all, this Cowboys team is giving up 36.5 points per game. Like, this is a quarter into the season. This isn't just like one bad game where they gave up 40 points. They're consistently giving up a ridiculous amount of points, and we said it all offseason long. It's like the perfect storm of a terrible defense that's actually had a couple injuries as well to make them even worse, paired with one of the most, if not the most, high-flying offenses in the NFL, weapons all around. Dak Prescott, even at running back. Zeke, Tony Pollard was making plays in this game. I know Jarwin went down, but Dalton Schultz has been great. And then the receivers, arguably the best receiving core in the league. But back to CeeDee Lamb. You know, this is exciting to see. And I was in a lot of trade talks with him over the past couple of weeks just because he's been such a hot commodity. And I haven't wanted to trade him, but now, I mean, it's one of those things where, is this something that's going to be sustained for the whole season, or is this potentially a sell high window? Let's talk about his game here.
He had 7 targets, caught 5 of them for 79 yards, so that's almost a 16 yards per reception there, and then added those 2 touchdowns as well. And to your point, you know, is this a sell high window on CeeDee Lamb? I don't think it is. I think it's something that is sustainable. I think you keep holding him and you just keep plugging him in. What we've seen is Gallup really be the guy who's more boom bust, with CeeDee Lamb as more of a safe, stable option. You know, we like slot receivers. We always like slot receivers for fantasy. And one of the rules, one of the little hacks, so to speak, is on game day, if you need a spot start, just find a slot receiver on an offense that might score. We see guys like Cole Beasley come out, and even on their worst days are decent enough for fantasy if you need 8 to 10 points. CeeDee Lamb is that, and then has just the pedigree, the explosiveness, the profile. He has everything. Like, I think we've seen enough now to say CeeDee Lamb is great, and he's gonna be great.
Yeah, here's what I'll say. I think CeeDee Lamb is, like, if he's your flex right now, you probably have one of the best flexes in your league, because I think you can lock him in as your wide receiver 2 or flex. He's going to have an incredibly high floor. We saw it in this one. Huge game with the 2 touchdowns. My one concern about Lamb, I love him as that high floor play. He's on the field. He's getting the snaps. He's getting the targets. This offense is insane. But Steph, surely, and maybe I'll be wrong on this, but surely the volume for the Cowboys offense is going to come down, even if it's 10%. Right? Like, Dak's not throwing for 6,500 yards. He's not going to have 800 attempts. He could, but it's not likely. So naturally, that's going to lead to slightly less volume for CeeDee Lamb. And right now, he's been fantastic, but he's seeing 7 targets a game, which is great, but a lot of these are underneath passes. He did have the big one this week, but a lot of these are shorter receptions. He's only right now he's averaging 14.7 yards per reception, but that was brought up by the huge game this week. So I think CeeDee Lamb is a very good play, but right now his value might be higher than it's going to be all season. And Steph, I just want to throw it back over to you. Like, CeeDee Lamb or Robert Woods for the rest of the year?
I'd go Robert Woods. And the reason is just...
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, CeeDee Lamb or Kenny Galladay for the rest of the year.
Oh, Kenny Galladay easily.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I'm telling you, people are so fired up about CeeDee Lamb right now. You might be able to trade him 1-for-1 for one of these guys, or package him with somebody else to make a huge upgrade at a position. So I think CeeDee Lamb's a fine play, but his value right now is sky high, and I wouldn't mind cashing in for a full season upgrade at the wide receiver position if you have the chance. Because look, the 2 touchdowns in this game were great, but in the red zone, they're going to try to run it in with Zeke. They're going to run it in with Dak. And then if they're going to pass the ball, you got Amari Cooper ahead of him in the pecking order. Dalton Schultz at the tight end spot has been very involved in the red zone this year. And arguably Michael Gallup, even though he's not as involved between the 20s, he's a red zone threat as well. So CeeDee Lamb, I don't expect to be putting up any more 2 touchdown games this year. Maybe he'll pop for another one. But the touchdowns aren't going to come every week. And without a couple of those big plays, this is just another very consistent, solid game for CD.
I'm surprised that you have this take and you're willing to flip them. I know, like, the receivers that you mentioned are guys that we have as, high-end wide receiver 2s, maybe wide receiver 1s. But, dude, CD is just, he's going to dominate all season. And the schedule, we've talked about the Cowboys' schedule. It's so easy. It's so soft, and it's everything you want, the perfect storm.
That's the thing. I'm in on CeeDee Lamb, and if you can't trade him for one of these ridiculous names, keep him locked in. This isn't necessarily, a sell high like it would be on some other guys that pop off, but this is a good opportunity to send out some feelers for some of these locked-in season-long values that might have disappointed in the last week or two and ride with CeeDee Lamb. For example, like I would take CeeDee Lamb over a guy like DJ Moore.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of where you're drawing the line. I'd take him over a guy like Jarvis Landry, obviously. So look, there's, he's definitely had his value skyrocket since the season has started, but send some feelers out there for some of these locked in wide receiver ones and see if people are tilting a little bit too hard, and you might just get yourself a value in a trade.
Yeah, and I definitely think you are right that people will pull the trigger on that, just with the name value, the hype value, so to speak, that CD is going to give you. With Michael Gallup, is he a guy that you're looking to move on from? Is he a guy that's just going to be a flex that sometime is going to end up on your bench and you plug him in when you need that boom upside? He was already more of a boom bust guy when he fished as a low-end wide receiver 2 in 2019, and now we're seeing him be even more boom bust. Less than 10 fantasy points on 2 weeks. Then he has that boom 25-point game in week 3, and then now back to another disappointing outing in this one. Only had 2 receptions for 29 yards on 5 targets, so he's being relegated to that pure deep threat, that pure field stretcher. He's on the field more often than the other guys, being out there as a blocker, being out there as a field stretcher just to move the defense around. Is Michael Gallup a guy that we can trust anymore at all?
No, but you're probably just keeping him on your bench. I mean, if you trade Michael Gallup right now, you're not going to get anything. I think he's still got enough upside to prevent you from cutting him at this point, and we talked about it with these other guys. The Cowboys offense could pop off at any time, but Michael Gallup's probably one of those guys you just got to stash on your bench, and he might find your flex occasionally if you have bye weeks or you have players that are getting hurt and you need a plug-in guy. Not someone you necessarily want to be starting every single week because he is so boom bust, but you're not going to get anything for him, so you might as well keep him on your bench. Keep him as your wide receiver 4, and if you have to plug him in, you just got to cross your fingers and pray that it's one of those big weeks, because we've seen it. He definitely has the capability to make that happen. But if Michael Gallup's sitting on waivers in a league, if someone's really fed up and they cut him, I'm willing to pick him up and just toss him on my bench. And if I get in a pinch, I can throw him out there and hope it's one of the booms. So he's disappointed. I think he's a true wide receiver 3 at this point who's going to be boom bust. But I'm not getting crazy and I'm not cutting him. I'd still take him over T.Y. Hilton. I'd take him over A.J. Green, guys like that.
Absolutely. And let's talk about some injuries, some unfortunate injuries to 2 stud running backs that happened almost simultaneously.
Man, again.
On the week, we have Nick Chubb went out in this matchup that we just talked about with an MCL injury. He's been placed on IR, expected to miss 6 weeks. So that value, that shot that we said, hey, this guy could be a mid-round league winner, a guy that you should be willing to draft at the right value. It's Kareem Hunt. And now it looks like he's going to come in and be a no-question, locked and loaded RB1, at least for the next 6 weeks here. I'm already plugging in Kareem Hunt as a flex. Now he's moving into a RB spot out of that flex range because he's going to take over this backfield and he's going to be dominant. In this game, he was only on the field for 34% of snaps, and he was coming in with a little bit banged up. He did have a groin injury on the week prior to game time, and he was questionable to even play. But in this game that, the Browns were absolutely running wild, Hunt had 11 attempts for 71 yards, 6.5 yards per carry, and then had 2 touchdowns on the ground. So assuming health for Kareem Hunt.
My start of the week.
Yeah, your start of the week. Great call there. Take that victory lap. Are you worried about D'Ernest Johnson or Dontrell Hilliard? I'm really not. I think they're both just going to be guys that come in and kind of take the other 30% to let Kareem Hunt have a breath.
Yeah, I mean, this game, the Browns were absolutely dominating the Dallas Cowboys till that comeback in the fourth quarter. You said it, Kareem Hunt came in with a little bit of an injury, so they were clearly limiting him, especially with that lead. If this is a competitive game, I think Kareem Hunt's on the field a lot more. I think he's seeing a lot more of these carries. So, yeah, I mean, Kareem Hunt, if you have him, he's a locked-in guy until Nick Chubb is back. Every single week, no questions asked. He is in your lineup. And we said he's an RB2, and if Nick Chubb goes down, he's a cleared, RB1, top 8 guy. Kareem Hunt, through 4 games with Nick Chubb in the lineup, RB7 right now. So now that Nick Chubb has gone down, you're not switching anything up. Kareem Hunt has been an absolute touchdown monster this year. So you're keeping him locked in. And Steph, he may have been my start of the week last week, but it was because I said he was going to get a ton of pass catching work in this game. He got 0 targets, but he still had a huge game. So I can't take the full victory lap. We're right about some things, we're wrong about some things, and this one I got a little bit lucky with those 2 touchdowns. But man, Kareem Hunt definitely looked good in this one. Dearness Johnson, I think in a deep league, he's worth a waiver wire stash. See what happens if Kareem Hunt continues to battle an injury and they want to keep this as like a 70-30 split. I think Dearness Johnson could have some value in a deeper league, or if Kareem Hunt missed any time, I think he'd be the next man up. But not a ton of interest. I'm not rushing to the waiver wire over him. I'd much prefer someone like obviously Josh Kelly on the Chargers, but also Justin Jackson on the Chargers, who we can just go ahead and talk about now, Steph. I mean, Austin Eckler, serious hamstring injury, also a hyperextended knee. He's expected to miss 6 weeks as well. And honestly, I, as someone who has Eckler in Dynasty, and just for the guy in general, we both love Austin Eckler. I was thrilled to see that he's only expected to miss 6 weeks. This looked really bad. I thought he was going to be out for the rest of the season. But having said that, Steph, we got to look at the fantasy implications. Josh Kelly is clearly the big winner here. Justin Jackson, I think, is a winner as well. How do you think this backfield's going to shake out?
I think it's be some sort of kind of what we already seen. Justin Jackson now stepping in to take over the Austin Eckler role. He's been efficient, though it has been on a limited sample size. Justin Jackson has. I'm willing to pick him up. He might be my top waiver wire running back of the week. Still not a guy I'm trying to go out and just blow on my fab on. Definitely not trying to blow on my fab on Joshua Kelly, but I think we're going to continue to see this Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler type split, except this time now it's going to be Josh Kelly and Justin Jackson. So same roles as ever. I think the offense, the Chargers offense, is going to slow down a little bit without Eckler. Eckler's been playing so well, evading so many tackles, creating so many yards for this offense. But with Justin Herbert coming in, giving some ignition to this fire, and I think both guys are flex or desperation RB2s, though I would take Kelly slightly over Justin Jackson just because we've seen it a little bit more so far this year, and this team runs the ball a lot. And if they're going to do that, I think Joshua Kelly is going to be the one to see most of that volume, whereas Justin Jackson's going to be the third down back, is going to be not on the in goal line situation. So that's where I give Joshua Kelly the slight edge, but I think both are kind of like streamer desperation options for the RB2 spot. I was expecting bigger things from Joshua Kelly when Austin Eckler went down. 57% of snaps in this game against the Buccaneers. Granted, it was the Buccaneers matchup. You probably weren't starting Joshua Kelly, so no sweat off anybody's back here. They have a tough matchup in Week 5 against New Orleans. I might end up actually fading both of those guys in Week 5, but then after that, the schedule is absolutely beautiful. We have the Jets, Miami, Jacksonville, and the Vegas Raiders all back-to-back-to-back after this New Orleans in Week 5. So that's when I would love to plug these guys in. That's when both are going to have value. I might be willing to even buy low on Joshua Kelly right now, even though you're probably not going to be able to now with this Eckler news. So don't overvalue Joshua Kelly for Week 5, but long-term I'm in.
I'm actually surprised. I'm surprised that's your take. You're way, way lower on Josh Kelly than I think you should be, Steph. If he's only rostered in 56% of leagues, so he's out there everywhere. If he's on your waiver wire, you gotta go get this guy. I'd be willing to put in a hefty waiver bid for Josh Kelly, because to me, I literally would value him as like a David Montgomery type player for the next 6 weeks. And David Montgomery's not lighting the world on fire, but if he was on your waiver wire, you would go scoop that guy up. I think Josh Kelly's gonna see a decent amount of rushing volume in this offense. I mean, we think David Montgomery's this huge volume play without a ton of efficiency, without a ton of touchdown upside. Josh Kelly, even with Austin Eckler, has one fewer carry than David Montgomery this year. So now with Eckler out, I don't think Justin Jackson's going to assume more work on the ground than Eckler did. So I think Josh Kelly's rushing workload is going to continue to be the same, if not higher, than David Montgomery's. They're going to have a similar role in the passing game, and Josh Kelly is the clear goal line back. So I think Josh Kelly is a locked-in RB2 here for the next 6 weeks. And if he's available on the waiver wire, I am going to absolutely scoop him up. Josh Kelly, I know he only had 9 carries in this game, but this was a back-and-forth game. They had a pick 6. Justin Herbert hit a couple super deep touchdown passes. So, they were asking a lot from Herbert trying to keep up with Tampa Bay. I know they were playing with the lead for part of this game, but they were such a quick strike offense that they didn't have a ton of time to run the ball. They only had 23 carries in this game. Herbert had 5 of them. So I think Kelly is going to be an extremely safe volume play here for the next 6 weeks. And I'm trying to go get him. With Justin Jackson, if he's available, I'll scoop him up. I think he could be a little bit disappointing, though, because you're expecting this great split. Jackson is going to get some of that receiving work, but he's not going to have the touchdown upside because I think Josh Kelly is the clear goal line back. So still willing to pick up Justin Jackson as well, but Josh Kelly is a clear winner to me.
Well, what's funny is that Justin Jackson actually outscored Kelly in this game, playing only on 39% of snaps. So fantasy-wise, he did outscore him. But here's the thing. I think this is going to be one of those backfields where no amount of analysis between me and you or any analyst out there is going to actually give us the clear answer. And I think there's going to be some weeks, this is where my reservations with Kelly come in, where Justin Jackson is actually going to be the guy. And there's going to be other weeks where Joshua Kelly is the guy, and it's going to be hard to figure out where those are going to come from. I think part of the value that a lot of fantasy players put on Joshua Kelly is based off of that one game where he had 23 attempts in week 2 against Kansas City. I don't see that happening again at all. But granted, if the Chargers are playing with the lead, let's talk about Justin Herbert here in a second. If they're in these winning game scripts, then yeah, why isn't it Joshua Kelly getting 15 to 20 touches a game as they hold this lead and run out the clock? So I think there's value for both. Like I said, I put Kelly slightly higher, but I think Justin Jackson is going to be more involved than Kelly managers want to talk about. But let's talk about Justin Herbert, who is absolutely cooking.
He's on fire.
Had his best week yet in the league on his lowest volume against a very good Buccaneers defense.
I can't believe he only threw it 25 times looking at this box score. And Steph, I will say, I think part of that is because they had the pick 6 on Brady, and then he had the 2 deep touchdowns where you're not having a 10-play drive going down the field with 6, 7, 8 pass attempts on the drive. It's literally just like one play and it's over. So I think that contributed to it, some of those absolute mega plays. But still, just incredibly efficient game for Herbert.
Over 23 fantasy points for Herbert in 2 out of the 3 games that he's played so far. He had the biggest throw of the week. Granted, we are recording before the Chiefs play, before the Pats play. I don't think Hoyer's gonna compete for that record. But then you got Mahomes and Rodgers and Matt Ryan all coming out on Monday night. But Justin Herbert had a 66 air yard touchdown pass to Jalen Guyton, fresh off the practice squad.
Cannon.
Absolute cannon of an arm. And I think the fantasy community, or the football community as a whole, needs to come out and just acknowledge, like, hey, we're not that good at evaluating quarterback talent. There's been so many times, even like look at Josh Allen, for example. Everyone thought he'll never be accurate. He'll never be anything more than just a fantasy asset and can't win this team. Josh Allen is absolutely destroying teams right now. Totally revamped his game and has led the Bills with a defense that's given up a lot of points to a 4-0 start. So, we look at quarterbacks and think we know everything. I think we just don't. And a lot of guys were out on Justin Herbert in the offseason. Granted, he had to fight with Tyrod Taylor, but I think for those dynasty investors...
He still is fighting with Tyrod Taylor. Anthony Lynn will not call him the starter, which makes no sense. And hopefully by the time you're listening to this, Anthony Lynn calls him the starter, but he's like so caught up on the fact that they've lost.
It's a veteran respect thing.
He's so caught up on the fact that they've lost the last 2 games, and he's like, I don't care how good he plays if we lost the game. It's like, well, it clearly wasn't Herbert's fault, so it's either you, Anthony Lynn, or it's somebody else.
I don't see how they see what Herbert's done here and move off of him.
It's crazy.
I think more of not calling him the starter is, the veteran respect. Anything else we need to say here on Herbert? Is he a guy that you're willing to pick up in redraft as maybe, is he more than a streamer? Is he a guy that you want to pick up and stash to see, hey, maybe he could stay in that 20-point fantasy range season long? He's had, 14 or more rushing yards in every game.
I think he's a streamer. If you got him in a dynasty, you're probably extremely happy. But I think he's a streamer. I mean, he's had these massive games, and this week they play at New Orleans, so that's going to be probably a tough one. But then after that, we talked about the schedule when we talked about the Eckler injury and Josh Kelly and Justin Jackson. After the Saints next week, they have the Jets, Dolphins, Jaguars, and Raiders. So, after next week, if you want to pick him up or you want to pick him up now and keep him on your bench for a week, if you're kind of rotating quarterbacks, I think he's going to have a really good stretch there in the middle of the season, and you can plug him in for some pretty solid games. So, before I was kind of staying away just as an unproven guy, but I mean, you look at Joe Burrow and people are picking him up and throwing him straight into lineups as a rookie. And I know Joe Burrow's a lot more polished as, a talent in the NFL, was the number 1 overall pick, obviously. But Justin Herbert's proven he can get it done as well. So no problem to stash him on a bench. And kind of roll him out there as he gets into some better matchups.
Could make up for, anybody out there who lost Cam Newton like I did testing positive for COVID. Well, now,
Yeah.
as opposed to plugging in Baker Mayfield or Ryan Fitzpatrick at the last minute like I had to do, now you can plug in Justin Herbert after this week 5, maybe even in this week 5. If you really desperately need to take the shot, there's nobody else in a better matchup out there. We'll talk about more of those on our podcast later in the week. Let's talk about 2 players that fantasy managers have been kind of sad about so far, been disappointed in their production.
Much sadness.
But now these guys have finally delivered on that value, on that draft capital that drafters put into them, and it's Joe Mixon and DJ Chark. Joe Mixon. Absolutely
Joe, show him how
exploded.
it's done, big guy.
Yeah, this is why we were saying do not sell Joe Mixon. We knew the down streaks were going to come. We said, look, you're just going to have to stick through it and just keep holding him.
We were worried.
And if you tried to sell him before, you weren't going to get enough. And wow, he comes in this matchup against Jacksonville with 42 fantasy points, had 25 attempts on the ground for 151 yards, 6 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns on the ground. And then he had 6 targets through the air, caught 6 of them for 30 yards and another touchdown receiving. So a fantastic game from Mixon. We're not going to expect this week in, week out, but is this a sign of better things to come? Or does Mixon come into that window where, hey, we got to temper expectations again? He could be in that 8 to 12 point range.
This is definitely a sign of things to come for me. I'm always open to offers, right? If someone in your league is coming out and they're like, hey, I'll give you Christian McCaffrey for Joe Mixon, I'm smashing the accept button. If they want to give me, a lot, if they want to give me Kareem Hunt for Joe Mixon, I might consider something like that as well. Just with the workload we know Kareem Hunt is going to get. But that, outside of the main guys like McCaffrey, Kamara, Zeke, Dalvin Cook, I think everything else you kind of have to think about. Even someone like Josh Jacobs has disappointed for the past couple of games. Kenyon Drake has really busted out here lately as well. So there's a lot of guys that are in kind of like the same tier as a Joe Mixon type player, but there's no one that's just like a no-brainer for me except the top guys. And to me, we've said it all season. A couple touchdowns and a little bit of receiving work is really going to change the narrative on Joe Mixon really quickly. I was expecting him to have like an 100-yard, 1 touchdown game with a couple of catches, and he blew that out of the water. But to me, this is a sign of things to come. The work has been there for Joe Mixon all season, even not counting this explosion of 31 touches in this game. In the first 3 games, he was averaging 17 carries and 2 receptions a game, which is really good for the running back position. And the big difference in this one was the 6 targets for Joe Mixon and none for Giovanni Bernard. So the touchdowns and the receptions were there. Obviously, we're not going to expect it each and every week. But if Joe Mixon's getting, 18 to 20 touches on the ground and he can add 4 or 5 targets a game, even without a touchdown, he's going to have an incredibly high floor. And then if he gets the touchdown, he obviously gives you a really strong performance. So the offensive line was much better in this one. The offense as a whole was much better in this one. So it was great to see for Mixon. The offensive line has been the problem for the first 3 games. It was nice to see them improve here in this game. So that's what I'm going to be keeping my eye on over the next couple of weeks. But I'm definitely not trying to go out and sell Joe Mixon right now.
Yeah, I would keep holding him and plugging him in. Are you concerned that Mixon has become hyper game script dependent? In this game, Cincinnati did get the lead. They were just trying to run the clock out. And we're just handing it to Mixon time and time again. And he was operating really efficiently. But I do have concerns with matchups against Pittsburgh twice on the slate, Baltimore twice on the slate. These really tough defenses. They even have Indianapolis in week 6. All I'm going to say is, look, don't overvalue Mixon off of one game. We've seen in these tougher matchups, these tougher game scripts, he's not being everything that we want him to be. This was his highest snap percentage by far, 83% of snaps here in week 4. His next highest was 71%, and then before that it was 50% range is where he was at. So we saw the game script kind of go his way. I'm just saying don't overvalue Mixon and just lock him in now as your RB1 and just sell off all your good players because you think Mixon is now broken out, is going to just dominate every single week. I think you're still going to have some down stretches for him when the game scripts really, really hurt him. He's kind of a more dependent guy, kind of even like a Nick Chubb earlier this year where they went down and then it was Kareem Hunt time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Those are good points you make. The schedule is tough as well. But Mixon, the hope is that the line can be just good enough and that he can get enough receiving work where even in those tough matchups, even in those tough game scripts, he's going to get enough touches and enough volume to put up a good performance. And what's really going to be interesting is in one of these game scripts where they're trailing, in the first 3 games, we saw Gio Bernard as like that third down back, keeping him on the field. In this one, Joe Mixon did get the targets, but it was a competitive game in the first half, and then they pulled away. So it was a little bit more natural. Joe Mixon was on the field more often, like you said. So to me, what's going to be interesting is when they get in one of these negative game scripts, a 2-minute drill, something like that, I want to see Joe Mixon on the field, and hopefully we'll get to see that here in the next couple of weeks.
So another guy who absolutely exploded, 30 fantasy points. It's DJ Chark. It's my guy. He absolutely went off, and I was so hyped to see it. This is what we drafted him to be. This is why in my preseason rankings, I had him as my wide receiver 13 going into drafts. So scooping him up everywhere. Thought he was a tremendous value, and we saw it. We saw 9 targets, caught 8 of them for 95 yards, and had 2 touchdowns. The rapport with Minshew has always been there. He's already had a touchdown this year. We just saw that one disappointing game early on where he was just seeing some low volume. Actually, the first 2 weeks he was seeing low volume, but I was more concerned over the injuries. Chark coming in with a back injury, with a chest injury, like those are areas of the body that would be concerning, especially the back for a wide receiver that's as athletic as Chark. Needs to go up in the air and make plays, and makes a lot of his hay off of speed. I was concerned about how he was going to be season long, if this is something that was going to be nagging him constantly. All those worries are put to the side, and for both of these guys, they were questionable coming into the week. I think this just tells us, all the other fantasy players out there, if a guy is healthy, if he's active, no matter what, as long as the team doesn't come out and say, hey, we're going to be limiting him, you got to plug him in there. You might get a goose egg from a guy like Will Fuller, who they say is healthy and then leaves early. But regardless, if they're active, you got to plug him in. You got to take that risk, especially on a guy like Chark, who has this insane upside, and the target volume is there. I think we're going to see more of the same here for DJ Chark. Next matchup is against Houston. After that, Detroit. So 2 good matchups coming up for him. I'm expecting big things for the next 2 weeks. Keep plugging him in. Don't sell high. Just really happy to finally see that Chark break out in 2020.
Yeah, man, it was fantastic. And you said it, first 2 weeks, was able to save his day. Week 1, he had the touchdown to save his day on 3 targets. Week 2, he had 21 yards per reception to save his day on 4 targets. 100% catch percentage through the first 2 weeks. Only went 8 for 9 this week, but it was just so good to see that target volume up. The 2 touchdowns obviously helps as well. But this is what we wanted for DJ Chark. And through those first 2 games and then missing the 3rd game, it was like, okay, they got Laviska Shenault involved. Tyler Eifert's getting looks at tight end. They got Keelan Cole out there, Chris Conley. James Robinson is getting looks out of the backfield. And it was just this really widespread offense. It's nice to see Chark clearly emerging as that number 1 option for Gardner Minshew. I'd expect a couple more big weeks, like you mentioned, Houston and Detroit in the next 2 games. If Chark can stay around 8-9 targets a game, he's going to have that touchdown upside. You called him kind of like a A.J. Green light earlier this year. I mean, this year, A.J. Green is DJ Chark light, but A.J. Green light in terms of what he's done in his career, in his prime. I love that comp. Always a threat, to score touchdowns in the red zone. He's a deep ball threat as well. So, look, I think Chark's great. If you stuck it out with him, you're keeping him in your lineup. You probably drafted him as your wide receiver too. And I think he's going to return on that value here for the rest of the year. So, great bounce back week in this one for both Joe Mixon and DJ Chark and that Jaguars-Bengals. I guess I'll call it a showdown in week 4.
Yeah, more like the toilet bowl. So let's talk about some buy low candidates, guys that underperformed here in week 4 that, fantasy owners are wondering, hey, is this a guy that I need to be going out and sending out some offers for? Is this something that we should be expecting more of in the future, these down weeks? I want to start with a couple running backs, and we'll talk about some wide receivers. But the first one here, Jonathan Taylor. Really disappointing outing after, we thought he was going to be absolutely insane taking over this backfield with Marlon Mack out. Now he's on his second week with a disappointing outing with less than 14 fantasy points. Against Chicago, Taylor had 9 total fantasy points, only played 46% of snaps. He did have 17 attempts, which you'd love to see there, for 68 yards, and then just had 1 target through the air, caught it for 11 yards. So, it's just something where he needed the touchdown to save his day, and is that going to be a recurring theme? He scored touchdowns in the last 2 games that have really saved you. I'm starting to be a little bit concerned for Jonathan Taylor. Maybe he's not quite this, Saquon Barkley level, Nick Chubb level, generational talent that's just going to come in and absolutely dominate from day one.
Yeah, it's been disappointing as a Colts fan. I mean, Taylor hasn't looked necessarily great. I mean, he's been okay. He's had some good plays, he's had some good runs, but he hasn't looked necessarily great. So, it's tough. I expect him to get things going. There's no excuses when you see other guys dominating. Like we saw CEH come out game one in the NFL and dominate. But with Taylor, everyone kind of reacts and adapts differently. There's been no offseason. He came in getting a lot of reps with the twos behind Marlon Mack. And Chicago's got a good defense as well. So you got to give him some time to ramp up. And I think Taylor is definitely a buy low candidate. The upside is still there for me. I think he's still got that top 12 RB1 upside full season. And when I look at this Colts team, they just haven't had to do a lot this season. Like, they're dominating games with their defense. Vikings, they absolutely dominated. Jets, they dominated. Bears, they dominated. So they've been in these low volume games, and the offense hasn't really needed to open it up and explode. So I expect them to kind of get things going for their offense in the next couple weeks. At your Browns next week, Steph, we're going to have some sort of bet on that one. Then they got the Bengals and the Lions. So I think Taylor's going to have 3 good games here. If you've got him, keep him in your lineup. I think he's going to turn it around. And although it is frustrating to see, these other guys, Jordan Wilkins and Nyheim Hines, combining for 18 carries, it's still nice to see Taylor get 17 of his own. I would like him, to take some of those carries away from Jordan Wilkins. He was in the game way too much, only had 1.7 yards per carry. But Taylor's going to get things going. I have no doubt. Just like we were saying with Joe Mixon, a little bit more passing work and a touchdown or two are really going to shift the narrative. I expect Taylor to have some of those things go his way here in the next couple of weeks. So if you have the chance to buy low on him, even after this game, I think you got to go do it. In our home league, Steph, we saw someone trade, David Montgomery and a couple of pieces for Jonathan Taylor. I love that move. Send another RB2 and a couple of other guys who might help as flexes or, tight end depth. There's never enough tight ends. So if you have 2 of them, maybe try to package them in a deal and go pick up Jonathan Taylor for yourself, because I think he's got a ton of upside at the running back position, and I'm not out on him yet.
Still a guy, maybe he's not top 3 upside like a lot of people were claiming. I still think he has top 10, top 8 upside at the running back spot, and things are only going to get better. He's a full workhorse back essentially, even with those other guys coming in. Let's talk about another running back that was heavily touted before the season, was going in the first round in a lot of drafts, and is seeing the passing game work that we wanted him to see. It's Josh Jacobs, only 10 fantasy points. And really after he exploded in week 1 in that 3 touchdown performance against Carolina, hasn't returned on that value in 3 tough matchups, 13 points, 8 points, 10 points, but has still been on the field a ton, has had double-digit carries in every single game, actually 15 or more carries in every single game, but just wasn't able to get much going this week. 3.2 yards per attempt. The Raiders' offensive line couldn't get anything going, but did see the 4 targets that we wanted him to see. So with Josh Jacobs, for me, he's still a hold. He's kind of going through the same thing that Joe Mixon did, where there's some tough matchups. You're not seeing the boom weeks. You're not seeing any touchdowns. Those are going to come with Josh Jacobs, a guy who is a full 3-down workhorse back, is getting targets through the air. I'm trying to buy low on him everywhere I can, and I'm not selling. If I have him, I'm plugging him right back in here against Kansas City in week 5.
No, I'm with you 100%. If you got him, you got to hold. You got to stick it out. He's getting the work. He's getting the volume in the passing game that we wanted him to get this season. I mean, if you look at the Raiders games, obviously Jacobs had the 3 touchdowns in week 1, which was awesome. If you look at week 2 against the Saints, Derek Carr threw a 3-yard touchdown pass and a 1-yard touchdown pass. Both red zone opportunities that easily could have gone Jacobs' way. If you look at them in week 3, Derek Carr threw a 1-yard touchdown pass. And then this past week against the Bills, Carr threw a 3-yard touchdown pass and a 7-yard touchdown pass. So Carr's throwing all these touchdowns inside of the 10-yard line. And, that's going to continue to happen. You're always going to, want to be multidimensional on the goal line in the red zone. But I would start to expect them to kind of start, giving Josh Jacobs the looks that close to the goal line. He did it really well in his rookie season. He's done it well this year when he's had the opportunities. So look for more of those opportunities and looks to go Josh Jacobs' way. It's good to me that the Raiders are at least getting down in the scoring zone. The Raiders' offense has actually been decent this year, even with a lot of the receiving options out of the lineup. So you said it, you're buying low on Josh Jacobs, sending out offers for him. And if you have him, you just got to hold. Luckily, he hasn't absolutely crushed you in any of these games, no 2-point performances, but definitely hasn't quite returned on that value just yet.
Part of the natural kind of ebb and flow of fantasies, you just see guys who have cold stretches, but there's also going to be some boom upside stretches and big weeks coming, and I think Josh Jacobs is going to be one of those. Another guy that some guys were even, fantasy drafters were taking back-to-back at the end of the first, second round turn is Miles Sanders along with Josh Jacobs. Sanders with a tough one in this game. Looked like he even got pulled towards the end there after a couple bad drops. He had 13 attempts for 46 yards, only caught 2 of his 4 targets for 30 yards, 9.6 fantasy points in a tough matchup against San Francisco. Are you reading into this one too much? Are you plugging Sanders right back in there?
Sanders, man, this one's a tough one for me. I think he's been fine. It's the same with all these guys. Like, Sanders, really rough game here on Sunday Night Football, but he's another player who's getting the work on the ground. He's getting passing work. It was a little bit lower this week in a really tough matchup against the 49ers. And in the next 2 weeks, he does have Pittsburgh and Baltimore. So, I don't think I'm trying to buy him low right now. Maybe I'll wait for the Pittsburgh game, for the Baltimore game. If he has a couple bad weeks, his value is going to go down to the person that has him on their roster. So maybe you can buy low at that point. But if you have him, I'm still holding. I think against Pittsburgh, against Baltimore, just from a volume perspective, Miles Sanders is still a guy who could turn in a solid game. He's a guy you have to start each and every week because there's just not a lot of players in the league right now getting 13 to 17 carries a game and 5 or 6 targets a game. So I know the Eagles offense has struggled. The matchups aren't going to be great here, but you got to hold on to Miles Sanders and hope for the best and hold on for the ride because we said it with Joe Mixon. Even though we were concerned, if you try to sell him low now, you're not going to get as much for him as you should. And thankfully for Mixon this past week, it turned into a really productive performance. So one big game from Miles Sanders is totally going to flip the narrative of what the rest of his year looks like.
Yeah, I would wait till after this Pittsburgh game, even after Baltimore. I think most fantasy players are getting smart enough now that they're going to know that, in a matchup against the Giants, they probably shouldn't trade away Miles Sanders, who still was on the field just as often. Like from a snap percentage, he just in the late game when they're coming back, final drive, it was all Boston Scott, and even Corey Clement was in there. But after this Pittsburgh Week 5 matchup, I'd be trying to scoop up Miles Sanders everywhere I possibly can, just like I would with Jonathan Taylor.
Steph, one more guy I want to talk about. I know it's not in our sheet, but I feel like we have to talk about this guy because going into the year, he was kind of in that same tier as Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders. We've talked about him a lot, but I just want to get a quick take on Kenyon Drake. To me, I'm much more concerned about Kenyon Drake than I was last week. I mean, terrible game against one of the worst run-Ds in the league, the Carolina Panthers. Kenyon Drake, 13 carries for 35 yards, and he's just not getting looks in the passing game. 0 targets in this game after only getting 2 targets, and 1 target through the first 3. The last 2 weeks, Detroit and Carolina should have been these bounce-back matchups for Kenyon Drake, and he's fallen flat in both of them. What are we doing with Kenyon Drake right now? Is he a hold? If someone comes to try to buy him from you, are you willing to sell? Or is he someone you're even going to go out and try to acquire in leagues? Or are you kind of trying to avoid Kenyon Drake? I mean, Chase Edmonds has looked good. Edmonds had, only 4 carries, but 16 yards on the ground and had the receiving touchdown in this game on 6 targets. What are we doing with this Cardinals backfield? Because I'm starting to get a little bit concerned about Kenyon Drake.
Oh, man, it's really concerning, and I hate this because I was all over Drake preseason. I thought he was going to absolutely explode. This offense is, moving, even though they did end up losing in this game, and Kyler didn't play his best. But, the air raid offense that we all like, that creates fantasy value for all the skill position players is just not giving us that right now. The air raid is more looking like not even the run raid, really. It's more of this, short, quick passing game. It's the more of a horizontal, think New Orleans Saints, the way they've been playing here the last 2 weeks when Kyler's been, kind of sloppy going downfield. So I don't really know what to do with Drake. He's probably a guy that, I'm willing to start him against the Jets, go back to the well one more time. I thought this was going to be the game for him against Carolina. And once he had that explosion, it was wheels up for Drake for the rest of the season. That did not happen here. Ended up having his worst game of the season so far, only 3.5 fantasy points. That did absolutely crush your lineup. You got to plug him back in, give him one more chance against the Jets. If he can't give you anything there, then I'm willing to move on, sell him for pennies on the dollar, and just see if I can get any sort of value because he's if you can't do it against Carolina and New York, you're not going to do it.
So let's go ahead and move on to a couple of wide receivers. First one here, DJ Moore, the wide receiver 2 on the Carolina Panthers. Steph, what are you doing with DJ Moore? I mean, he's really only put up one fantasy performance that you're happy about so far this year, and it was in garbage time against Tampa Bay in week 2. Fun fact on the Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater is 4th in the NFL. This is before the Monday night games with, Mahomes, Rodgers, and Matt Ryan. So maybe that changes after this Monday night game. But right now he's 4th in the NFL. Teddy is in passing yards. The volume is huge for this Carolina Panthers football team, yet DJ Moore still hasn't really produced. What are we doing with DJ Moore?
I think I'd still be willing to buy him low. I'm not going to overpay for him, but he does have a great matchup against Atlanta here in week 5. I think it's the stage is going to get set for a get-right game for DJ. From a talent perspective, I like him way over Robbie Anderson. I don't know where this chemistry is coming from. I saw somebody saying, hey, maybe Teddy and Robbie worked out together on the Jets more than we all thought. And these guys have some rapport there that's been built. And something that I thought is that when CMC went out with injury, that DJ Moore was going to get an uptick in all facets. He was going to get more targets, more looks in the red zone. He's not seeing that because Mike Davis essentially stepped in and just taken over this CMC role and done really well with it. We saw Reggie Bonifant come in and get get a touchdown in this game as well, and he's been fine when he's been called upon in Carolina. I think it's something that's half game script and half game plan. I still believe in the talent of DJ Moore. He's seeing decent enough target volume that you just got to keep plugging him back in. You mentioned the production that Teddy Bridgewater has offered them. He's just a guy that, look, he's in a tough stretch. He gave you that 120-point week. Outside of that, you're getting about 10 points, a little bit less than 10 points on a weekly basis. That's just what you expect from a wide receiver too. So, look, temper expectations with DJ, but plug him back in against Atlanta. Hope he can pop off again. And give you another 120-yard performance and 20 fantasy points like he did against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I think you plug him back in a great matchup against Atlanta. If he does have a big week, I might be willing to sell because he's just not going to get the touchdowns. He's never been a touchdown guy. And, the 13-target game for 120 yards was great in week 2. But outside of that, if he's only seeing 6, 7, 8 targets a game and he's putting up, 4 for 60, 5 for 60, things like that with that touchdown, he's absolutely killing you for the value you got him. So if he has a big week out here in week 5 against Atlanta, I think he's a sell. But if you don't, I think he's still, like you said, a low-end wide receiver 2 with some upside weeks for the rest of the season. But anytime you take a guy in, the 3rd round and through 4 weeks, Scotty Miller, Cole Beasley, and Tim Patrick have more fantasy points than you, it's a tough scene.
Absolutely. And let's talk about Darius Slayton, last buy low candidate here. Played on 97% of snaps with Sterling Shepard and Saquon Barkley gone from this New York Giants offense. Saw 7 targets, but only caught 3 of them for 48 yards. What are we doing with Darius Slayton? I loved him early on in the year, had that big explosive 28-point game against Pittsburgh, but things have kind of fizzled out since then. Hasn't hit double-digit fantasy points in 3 weeks now. Are you willing to buy him knowing that the usage is still going to be there? With Shepard out, is he a guy that you're just, it's kind of you're on your bench and you're just considering him if he's there in a flex and he's the best guy there?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we expect out of Darius Slayton. It happened a little bit differently because the pop game was in week 1. But if he would have had, 3 for 53, 3 for 48, and then in week 3 had a pop game, we'd be like, oh, Slayton had one of his 3 pop games that he's going to have this year. So this is business as usual for Darius Slayton. I'm not really wanting to go acquire him, give anything up for him. He's rostered in 72% of leagues right now. So the ownership percentage is declining on a week-by-week basis after another disappointing performance. I think he's going to end up on a lot of waiver wires. So if he's out there, definitely scoop him up because he's kind of in that Michael Gallup category right now of someone who is involved in the offense. He's going to be able to have big plays, big yards per catch, things like that. And occasionally he's going to pop off for that massive game. So I'm not necessarily trying to buy low. He's just another guy you can throw in your flex as a wide receiver 4 if someone's on bye, someone's injured, and hope that it's one of the few pop weeks that he's going to have over the course of the season.
If I can, I would try to acquire him, and I'll tell you why. It's because the schedule opens up massively for the Giants here over the next couple of weeks. They have Dallas, Washington, then Philly, and then after that, then they have Tampa Bay, and then it's gorgeous the rest of the way. Washington, Philly, Cincinnati, Seattle, Arizona, Cleveland, and then Baltimore in week 16. But if you can buy low on Darius Slayton right now for, like, don't overpay for him. I would give you, maybe another wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, maybe one that has some name hype, or maybe a guy that's, got some usage, had a pop week. Go sell him and try to pick up Slayton, because I think there's still a ton of boom upside potential for him to take over as the wide receiver 1 in this team, as the guy that Danny Dimes looks to score points when they need it. It's just the last couple of games, the Giants as a whole have just looked absolutely brutal. If they can get it together, I think Slayton's going to absolutely benefit from that. So I'm willing to take the shot, put a couple chips in on Slayton, but not overpaying by any means.
Stef, Slayton or Michael Gallup rest of the season in PPR?
I'd go Gallup just by a hair.
Fair. Better offense, better quarterback.
Exactly.
Totally, but they're the same.
Better O-line. That's probably the main thing.
Yeah, similar situations for me as a whole. But let's go ahead and talk about another receiver we are not selling high. It is Terry McLaurin. This guy has been lights out so far this season. The clear number 1, 2, and 3 option in this Washington passing game. This guy's matchup proof, and like a tough matchup against the Ravens. Dwayne Haskins is your quarterback. You play for a football team that doesn't even have a mascot, and you're going to go out here and put up, what was this stat line? 10 catches?
10 catches on 14
10
targets.
catches, 118 yards. Unreal. Unbelievable. I mean, Dwayne Haskins, believe it or not, threw for 300-plus yards in this game, but 14 targets for Terry McLaurin is fantastic to see. Is he a wide receiver 1 right now?
Yeah, he's the wide receiver 8 on the year, and we could easily see him finish in that 8 to 14 range. I think McLaurin is a guy that you got to now plug in every single week. We have seen no evidence that McLaurin's slowing down at all whatsoever, and it's really a situation where he's getting this funneled volume. He's the one option on this team. And like you said, first, second, and third read for Dwayne Haskins. It's not Logan Thomas, as much as I wanted that breakout to happen. Antonio Gibson has been decent for them on the ground and has kept that offense moving when they've needed him to. And even in a game that was mostly garbage time, we still saw McLaurin absolutely eat. So in all matchups,
they're going to be in a lot of garbage time.
A lot of garbage time for this team. And, like we said, like, this isn't the Washington team of last year where they're tanking and they're not gonna run the ball 30 times a game again. They're actually going to try to compete. They're going to try to move the ball. They're going to pass. And I would not be surprised if Kyle Allen comes in. We saw what Kyle Allen was able to do with DJ Moore in Carolina. Able to give him
Volume.
a 1,200-yard season, 87 catches on the year in 2019 for DJ Moore. We might see that again for McLaurin in a very similar situation where he's getting this funneled volume and they don't really have that many other options. And McLaurin has proven like he is a dominant wide receiver. He's an elite talent. And if he was on a better team, I think we'd be hailing him as one of the next best things.
And I mean, you look at McLaurin's schedule the rest of the way. They get the Giants twice. They get the Cowboys twice. They get Detroit, Cincinnati, Seattle. They're going to be in a ton. I know we're talking about how he's matchup proof. Like, you're starting him every single week. But expectations in some of these shootout games are going to be incredible. And I think he's going to return that value. They get Carolina in week 16, championship week in fantasy football. So if you invested a mid-round pick in Terry McLaurin as your wide receiver 2, you're thrilled. And I'm with you, Steph. I think not only is he a wide receiver 1 right now through 4 weeks, I think he finishes there as well. Super excited for McLaurin. Just an incredibly talented player on an incredibly bad team. But, I mean, hey, they're still in contention in the NFC East, so who knows?
Yeah, I think any team could win the NFC East at this point. A few other stats here on McLaurin. He has the highest route participation in the league. He's 4th in terms of snap share in the league amongst wide receivers. 6th in receiving yards, but 14th in receptions. So he's creating a lot of his own yardage. It's not like, he needs to have all these touches and big plays manufactured for him. He's just a guy that if you get the ball in his hands, it's going to lead to some production. Is 11th in targets so far on the year with 25 of those, 25% target share, which is top 12 at the position. The sad thing is here, even though he's at number 1 in yards after the catch, McLaurin is 10th in the league in unrealized, uncaught, right, air yards. So, if you see that, that's so much room for regression. That's so much room for improvement from McLaurin. And one of those things in drafts is, hey, can this guy that we pick up, this guy on my roster, can he outperform where his ADP is? And McLaurin was one of those guys. We really liked him as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in drafts for this very reason. And now he's just delivering on that value. if anything happens, if there's any upgrades to the offense, to the quarterback, you're going to see really, really big things from Terry McLaurin. So I'm willing to put chips in on him. If somebody's willing to sell high on him, I'm willing to buy high on McLaurin.
Man, if he had a quarterback or if he was on a different team, who knows? I mean, Dynasty, Terry McLaurin, if you have Terry McLaurin, you got to be feeling fantastic right now. But, Steph, let's go ahead and move on to a tough situation in L.A. What is going on in this backfield? I mean, you got Cam Akers out. You got Darrell Henderson, who looks like he's taking over the backfield. And all of a sudden, Malcolm Brown leads the team, in carries. What is happening in L.A.? And can you trust any of these guys moving forward? For me, it's a no. I'm avoiding this Rams backfield at all costs for the rest of the year unless two of them are out with an injury.
It's looking that way. There might be some hot streaks, but anytime you plug one of these guys in, unless it's Akers after a breakout and he takes over, you're just chasing points on a week-over-week basis. We don't know what McVay is going to do. He's a guy that every single game, it seems like he schemes a couple key players to have big fantasy weeks. You look at like Robert Woods in week 1, Cooper Kupp in weeks 2 and 3, and Darrell Henderson absolutely
Tyler
dominating.
Higbee last year.
Exactly. Yeah, Higbee had that insane historic stretch for a tight end at the end of last year. It's just something where we can see the ball moved around to specific players based on what McVay sees on a week-in, week-out basis, and that's why, at least for now, you got to fade both Henderson and Brown. Kudos to you, Alex. You weren't as high as I was on Henderson. I thought Henderson had an opportunity to go in and take over this backfield and be the RB1 after putting it up 20 fantasy points in 2 weeks, had the touchdown both weeks. I thought there's no way that they were going to go away from him in those games against Philadelphia and Buffalo. And then an easy matchup against the Giants, it turned into be a trap for Darrell Henderson. And as he was on the field for 39% of snaps to Malcolm Brown's 61%. So it was just one of those weeks. And it's one of those things where unless it's Cam Akers, I don't want any guy in this backfield, not because I don't think they can produce and have great fantasy weeks, but because there's going to be weeks where they're giving you 4 or 5 point fantasy outings. You just don't want to take that risk on your roster. I would much rather flex even a safer wide receiver name like a Cole Beasley, like a Justin Jefferson, like any of these other guys over Darrell Henderson or Malcolm Brown by extension.
Agreed. It's not even worth it. Like, I guess if you're in a deep league and you need a running back 3 or a running back 4 to play during bye weeks, to play if someone gets hurt, and you have to just plug him in one time and just pray that it's, the Darrell Henderson week or the Malcolm Brown week, I guess they're still rosterable. But with Cam Akers coming back, it's just going to get more and more murky. Steph, I will say Cam Akers now only rostered in 64% of leagues. I expect that to keep plummeting as he missed another game. If Cam Akers is sitting out there on your waiver wire, are you willing to stash him and wait and see if he takes over this backfield when he gets healthy?
I am. He's now the one guy that, like I was saying, Henderson could explode and just take over. When Akers comes back, he's in that contention if you can get him for barely anything with very minimal cost, with the upside that he could take over and be the dominant one that they want. I mean, we look at the game before Akers got hurt, he was absolutely eating. So if they go back to him, if they give him the opportunity and he does become a player that McVay schemes for, you're going to see some upside and some boom potential from him. But for the time being, it's not a guy that I want to overpay for or try to trade for. See if he falls to the waivers after a couple more missed weeks and people just say, hey, I'm out on this backfield. Well, now you could swoop in and get some upside potential from a Cam Akers, who is the most talented guy in this running back room.
One more rookie I want to talk about. It's T. Higgins in Cincinnati. A couple good games here in a row for the Bengals with Joe Burrow. It seems like Higgins is getting more and more involved, and A.J. Green is getting less and less involved. Steph, what do we do with this Cincinnati Bengals wide receiving core? I mean, Tyler Boyd is obviously a start every single week. He continues to be fantastic.
Yeah.
But A.J. Green just doesn't look the same. He looks like he's lost a step. And T. Higgins looks fantastic. T. Higgins did have a couple he could have came down with in this game, but he saw 7 targets this week, 4 catches for 77 yards. A.J. Green, 1 catch, 3 yards on 5 targets. It seems like that is starting to shift towards T. Higgins being the wide receiver 2 in Cincinnati. If you have A.J. Green, are you bailing?
I'm not bailing, but I'm definitely concerned. It's going to be tough to start him against Baltimore. So he's probably a guy I'm going to sit and just see what he does for a little bit. Maybe sell high if you can get somebody who will overpay for that name value, who is a big Burrow believer. Yeah. Maybe you can get something for him. But not a guy that I want to start over the next 2 or really 3 weeks with matchups against Baltimore, Indianapolis, and then Cleveland. So maybe you plug him back in against Cleveland. But for a guy who's on the field for 71% of snaps, that is just not the kind of production that you want to see. AJ Green still hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. And considering that he is in a contract situation where he was franchise tagged, if Cincinnati Bengals realize that T. Higgins can be the guy that they can put as the alpha X on the outside with Tyler Boyd operating as more of like a, slot guy, Juju Smith-Schuster, Adam Thielen type of profile, I don't see why they don't just let T. Higgins take over and let AJ Green walk after this year. And so if they're seeing what they like out of Higgins, who looks like he's getting some type of rapport going with Burrow, was only on the field for 57% of snaps, saw 7 targets, so more than AJ Green, and caught 4 of them, so more than AJ Green in both ways. And I think there was more there for Higgins. He had a couple passes that I thought were fully catchable, just made some rookie mistakes. I think we're going to see big things from him. If he's out on waivers, I think you've got to go out and get him. Maybe not plug him in again against Baltimore, but still a guy that I want stashed on my bench who could take over and really be the AJ Green in this offense. They said during the draft, Zach Taylor and the front office in Cincinnati said, oh, we're not drafting T. Higgins to be the AJ Green replacement. But that's really what we've seen so far. They're both operating in the same way. They're both these, 6'4", 200-pound wide receivers that can beat targets in the end zone, can beat targets downfield. Same thing like we said with DJ Chark. That same type of profile that AJ Green is exactly what T. Higgins is. So I'm willing, especially in a dynasty, if you can buy high on Higgins, I would do so because I think we've seen enough to say you can go out and get him. And he only had 13 fantasy points in this game, but was super efficient, 20 yards per catch, and was seeing a lot of great looks in this offense. So assuming that the game scripts will continue to be awful for Cincinnati, which I have no doubt they will be, Higgins is going to be a guy you want.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Higgins is someone you need to pick up on the waiver wire. We look at Justin Jefferson, too, who just had the explosion game, and then he followed it up with a really good performance in Week 4. I think T. Higgins is getting to that same category. Had the explosion game in Week 3, followed it up with a really solid performance in Week 4. Pick him up. I'm not saying start him right away, but continue to see if he builds that rapport with Joe Burrow, gets on the field a lot, gets more targets than guys like A.J. Green, and he might turn into something like, last year we saw A.J. Brown really pop in the back half of the season. Some of these rookies, we're going to continue to see them get worked up in their offenses and then be really, really solid contributors down the stretch. So I love that call. And with A.J. Green, man, I'm with you. I think you don't cut him. If someone's willing to give you something for him because he's A.J. Green, take it, or if you can get any kind of value for him, take it. But I'm probably just going to leave him on my bench. He's in, T.Y. Hilton category for me. You're probably putting him on your bench and waiting to see them do something before you feel confident about putting them in your lineup. And Steph, I want to throw out a quick hot take here before we close out this episode. I know we're running a little long on time, about to wrap it up. I think A.J. Green's getting traded this year. I think A.J. Green, word on the street is he's been really good for Joe Burrow, really helped Joe Burrow get ramped up. He's helped him a lot. Has been a good leader, mentor for him. Obviously a good receiver to throw to as well. But A.J. Green only a 42% catch rate this year. Hasn't had the rapport with Joe Burrow on the field. And now that the Bengals are seeing what they're getting in T. Higgins, now that they're 1-2-1 in a really tough division with the Steelers who are 3-0, the Ravens who are 3-1, the Browns who are 3-1. A.J. Green is going to be a free agent after this year. Why not trade him for a mid-round pick to a contender and get something for him? I wouldn't be surprised to see a team like the Green Bay Packers trade for A.J. Green, maybe even the Eagles who are contending and have some injuries as well. Like, it would not surprise me one bit to see some teams shuffle around some cap space and make a move, a low-risk move who could really help an offense for someone like A.J. Green. So if that happens, you heard it here first. Here at the end of Week 4, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Bengals make a move.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I think that's it for us. We checked all the boxes here. A lot of hot takes, a lot of fun players to break down, a lot of great matchups coming up here in Week 5. And, man, it's just crazy that we're already 4 weeks into the season. Now we're starting to see some things that, hey, are these trends? Are these boom explosions that are one-time things? So as time goes on, we're going to have more clarity on these players, guys that you should be investing in, guys that you should be selling anywhere possible. But thank you all so much for listening and watching. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button. That is huge for us. A like is always appreciated as well. And thank you all again so much for listening and watching. And we'll see y'all next time. Peace.
Peace.